The environmental movement started in the late 1960s and early 1970s when Americans became concerned about the environment. Their main area of concern was in preserving natural resources.
During this time, there were many oil spills, lake fires, and other disasters that forced people to consider how they could not only prevent these issues, but also preserve what was left of the environment from further damage.
The purpose of the environmental movement was to create legislation and public groups that would provide an effort to fight against pollution and also to protect natural resources from further damage.
During the 1960s and 70s, there were many factors that pushed the American public to join the environmental movement. There are two events that were most influential to the movement in raising awareness for the hazards that were posed to the environment.
The first incident of note is the Lake Erie fire. In the late 1960s, pollution of lakes had gotten out of hand, but the government wasn't doing anything in response. On June 22, 1969, the pollution had begun brimming over and moving from the Cuyahoga River into Lake Erie. All the debris then caught fire. This caused millions of dollars in damage to boats, houses, and other property that was near the lake.
The reason the Lake Erie fire is so popularly known is because it was written about in the New York Times and drew a lot of attention from the American public. This new attention was directed towards the environmental movement, which benefited from the addition of new members who would later help to prevent and clean up pollution.
Another incident that occurred around the same time was the 1969 oil spill in Santa Barbara Channel in California. This oil spill was so huge that it was impossible for the U.S. government to ignore the issues that it would cause the environment.
The spill had a huge impact on marine life, including the killing of 3,500 seabirds as well as other marine animals. There was a cry of public outrage, which was shared by media coverage that captured the spill and the reaction. In response to this, numerous pieces of environmental legislation were passed, including the Clean Water Act.
All of these incidents provided fire to fuel the environmental movement. The public was brought together under their collective concerns for the damage that was not only affecting the environment but also themselves.
Silent Spring by Rachel Carson was published in 1962. In this novel, Carson criticized society's use of pesticides by providing extensive evidence of its negative effects on the environment as a whole.
Carson provides evidence of the government using DDT, a chemical present in pesticides, for several purposes without consideration of the harmful influence of DDT on the environment.
Carson was inspired to write this report by a 1957 lawsuit filed by the citizens of Long Island against the Department of Agriculture. She evaluated the presence of DDT in society in all of its stages, including its creation, in human cells as well as animal organisms.
Her expansive evidence allowed readers to see the negative effects of pesticides on the environment, causing Americans to seriously reevaluate the role of science in society and how often pesticides are used.
In addition to exposing the way pesticides affect animals, Carson exposed the presence of dangerous pesticides in everyday products typically found in American homes, such as treated linens, bug spray, and shelf liners.
Carson's expose sold 500,000 copies and stimulated the passage of several legislations, including the National Environmental Policy Act, the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, and the ban of DDT in the United States.
In 1970, the federal government established the Environmental Protection Agency, which coordinated the efforts of the federal government to protect the environment from harmful chemicals and misuse.
The Environmental Protection Agency implemented several pivotal policies that protected the environment, including the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, which was the act that established the Superfund.
The Superfund provides federal funding for cleaning up materials that are harmful to the environment and is headed by the Solid Waste and Emergency Response Office of the EPA.
The National Environmental Policy Act was enacted on January 1, 1970.
As a result of the National Environmental Policy Act, federal agencies review government proposals and how they're policy environment.
NEPA also granted other responsibilities to federal agencies such as reviewing and resolving permit applications, managing federal land, and constructing various public facilities like highways. The NEPA set up several measures to ensure the environment was being considered in proposed legislature.
The Clean Air Act was passed in 1970 in hopes of regulating pollution of the air. This enabled the EPA to put in place air quality standards to protect the public and the environment from the negative effects of pollution.
2 years later, the Clean Water Act was passed. This legislation allowed for control of water quality and the way that agents of pollution are given off in water.
In 1972, the same year that the Clean Water Act was passed, the United States government banned DDT, which is a chemical pollutant present in pesticides. The ban of DDT was partially inspired by the publication of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, as well as extensive outcry from the American people.
The environmental issue movement was sparked in the 1960s by compounding environmental issues and incidents that grew to cause harm to the American population.
This movement had the goal of fighting for new legislature that would preserve and protect the environment from any further damage from pollution and other dangers. They accomplished some of their goals as new legislation was created.
In order to achieve these goals, there first had to be horrible incidents that inspired the American public to join and fight against environmental harm. These events, however horrible they may have been, provided the opportunity to a community to come together and preserve the environment.
Efforts continue into modern day as many programs established during this time are still in effect. These programs and legislature continue to make strides towards saving the environment.